Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Moosecast here at Northwestern Connecticut Community College. With me, we have Northwestern alumni and current history major at Western Connecticut State University, Isabella Pinto. And we have two of our Student Senate members here, Jackie Coons and Mr. Eric Green. Welcome, everybody. All right, today we're talking about current events. Today happens to be first week of March, and there's a lot going on here in the year 2022. We have continued the god-awfulness of 2020, and we just keep that truck rolling. And so right now, we have major conflict going on in the Ukraine with Russia and invasions. We have freedom convoys, and we have all sorts of stuff. So let's get into it. I think the first one is got to be Ukraine and Russia, right? I mean, this is terrifying. It has major implications for a lot of people across the globe. I think people think we're isolated because we are, it's not in our backyard. It's on what they think is the other side of the world. But really, we're if you look at Alaska, we're not that far from Russia, and these are people who are a nuclear power, and that's scary when there's real live combat, between nuclear nations. It's kind of terrifying. So, what are your thoughts? Let's go with this. How do you feel about this?
I think it's definitely kind of scary, especially for people who live in Ukraine, but even on a global scale. I mean, it's just things have escalated very quickly with the nuclear threats. Even though it's very unlikely that anything will happen, it's still just something that's very scary to think about, that it's even a possibility.
Well, yeah, I mean, just a few days ago, President Putin put the nuclear forces on high alert, and no one knows what that actually means. Right. Which is, did anything change? Nobody knows. Does it mean like they're about to light the fuse? I mean, we really have no idea, and I don't know if President Putin's using that to his advantage. It's a little scary though.
Yeah, I mean, I would kind of think that other nations who have good military forces and have that kind of understanding of what a high alert in a nuclear weapon means, obviously, I would assume by their actions are not very concerned, considering that they are not sending significant military help or putting our missiles or anything like that on high alert. So I assume that they're not that concerned that Putin's going to use them, or maybe they are and they've already kind of put that into action, then we don't know about it. So that's kind of the interesting thing about politics and like international relations, is you really have no idea what anybody's doing or what anybody's thinking. It all kind of happens behind the scenes. And I would assume, though, if they were very concerned about whatever that means, that they would have done something other than just watch, as we've kind of been doing.
Eric, what's most concerning for you?
I mean, the nuclear threat is pretty concerning. Just the fact that Putin is kind of unhinged, and we're sending a lot of aid and military equipment to Ukraine to help them. So it's kind of worrying if Putin's going to look at that and be like, you're targeting or you're helping Ukrainians kill Russians. He targets us then. So that's really what kind of concerns me. And then this is like the first major conflict in my lifetime, so it's interesting to watch unfold.
Well, it's definitely a delicate balance that I think you're seeing world powers trying to walk a very fine line between wanting to support the Ukraine, but without getting directly involved because they don't want to be seen as an adversary that wants to get into an armed conflict with another nation. But there's a deep history here in the Ukraine with this. They became a nation in 1991. This is before I think all of you here were born. But in your history lessons, you have Ronald Reagan, Mr. Gorbachev tear down this wall. There's a lot that has gone on, and the deconstruction of the Soviet Union is what I think is one of the biggest driving factors. President Putin is a former KGB officer. He really wants to see the Soviet Union back and views a lot of these breakaway countries, if you will, and in his eyes, they're breakaway countries that fled to Western ideals as part of the Soviet Union. He wants to bring them back. 2004, you have Estonia, you have Latvia, Lithuania, all joined NATO. The Baltic states, and slowly but surely they've really, kind of moved towards a Western ideal. And just a few days ago, in the middle of the conflict, President Zelensky signed papers to have the Ukraine join the EU, not NATO. Big distinction. But that was a buffer for President Putin between the West, and now if they were to join NATO, which was a big threat for him, there's missiles in his backyard and all those sort of things. It diminishes his sphere of influence, which is a lot. But let's talk about how do you think this is going to impact your day to day, other than the frightening reality of thermal global nuclear war?
I think that it'll definitely impact us, like with gas prices. Gas prices are going to rise as the sanctions increase on Russia. And I think that things in general are going to become more expensive. I think that's probably the most likely thing we'll see here in the States. And that'll be the biggest effect for us.
Well, and President Biden did say that the cost of freedom comes. There's a cost of freedom, and we're all going to have to share in paying that price.
Yes.
I don't think many Americans were thrilled with that. I think they appreciate the sentiment, but perhaps when things were economically a little bit better than they are currently with inflation, it would have been an easier pill for people to swallow. But
Right.
we do, so we imported last year from Russia about 200,000 barrels of crude oil and 500,000 barrels of other petroleum products from Russia. We use on average about a little under 8 million barrels of oil a day, or that's imported in total. So they have a big chunk of the amount of oil that we import.
Yeah.
And we're still buying it.
Yes.
Despite the other sanctions, and you're seeing a big outcry. What do you think we should? Should we shut off the spigot from Russia? Which is one of Putin's biggest, funding. That's pretty much one of their biggest exports that they rely heavily on. And what should we do here if we do that?
I mean, I definitely think that it would probably be the most rational idea to shut off kind of the import of oil and petroleum products from Russia. And we go back to what we were doing for 4 years and kind of rely on ourselves for production of oil. It's not like we don't have a very large untapped natural resource of oil, natural gas. We have all the materials to be able to make it work and reopen the pipeline that made gas so cheap to begin with. Because there was, places here in Connecticut where I was paying $1.90 for a gallon of gas as opposed to almost $4 now. And that comes with importation, is you pile on fees and it gets more expensive. And especially when you start to run your own reserves dry and you have no choice but to import from places like Russia because of the unwillingness to rely on your own natural resources.
Yeah. So, I did see today that I think we opened some of our oil reserves. I don't know how much, but back when Trump was president, he was trying very hard to get the energy independent status of our nation higher, and he was doing a pretty good job at it. And then Biden came in and he started importing more oil from other countries. So it makes us rely heavier on them, and if we implement sanctions on Russian oil, it's just going to drive the price up at the pump. But that's probably a price that we're going to have to pay if we want to do anything to help Ukraine.
Exactly.
Yeah. I agree with
Because
that.
that's the kind of money that's going to pay for a war.
Yes.
That's how you pay for food to feed your troops. That's how you pay for the technology. That's how you pay people to continue assaulting another country, is basically by increasing your foreign exports. And that's something that we've seen in almost every war, is the ability to basically blackmail other countries to continue economically engaging with you so as to continue conflict. So I think if, their largest importers of oil said we're not going to do it anymore, that would really start to hit home economically. It would also, because Russia is an oligarchy and a system, they definitely rely on very large industry to keep those who are the wealthiest and most powerful in their country happy. And once you stop that, I think that Putin will see that a lot of people are going to begin opposing not only this specific war that he started, but also will kind of drive him into the ground politically.
Well, and you brought up a good point. So Russia really relies heavily on the revenue from natural gas and oil. They're one of the biggest exporters in the world. They supply 40% of the natural gas and 25% of the crude oil to Europe, which is a lot. And Putin, to his credit, was getting, building up a war chest. And he had about $500 billion in foreign currency stashed in banks around the world, all primarily from oil revenue. And that was his backup plan. As we see today, as of March 1st, the ruble is worth 1 cent. The stock exchange in Russia is frozen. Yeah. They can't move money in and out. They actually froze the foreign banks, which has now frozen all of those assets that are outside of the country. And that's what has really hurt him the most, because now not only is his own economy crippled, but he can't rely on the foreign currency, which still had a lot of value. And that he was going to use as a reserve to fund this as a way to get around, the sanctions from multiple nations and nation states that have imposed on him. And so where does he go from here? Apple and Google have cut off Google Pay. People can't even, they're scrambling for cash. There's a run on the banks. The Russian people are going to suffer greatly from this, and it doesn't seem like they want this.
No.
From the reports and the protests, which they're arresting their own people for protesting this. It's putting the Russian government in a very bad situation. It's either he's going to be out of power, or what I think a lot of people are concerned is when you get very desperate, you do very desperate things, and that can be very frightening when you have someone who has nuclear weapons.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. I think that's part of it, but actually when you say about the protests that are happening in Russia, today the New York Times came out with a report from the Pentagon that said that a lot of the troops are actually sabotaging their tanks or their vehicles, or just handing them over to the Ukrainians because they didn't even truly know why they were there. And the Russian government has been seizing the cell phones of their troops so as not to allow outside news. So they're rolling over the border into the Ukraine and not understanding why they're even there. And they expected, to either be welcomed, that they were helping the country, but it's been realized by a lot of their troops that is not why they are there.
The Ukrainian ambassador to the UN read a text messages from a soldier who was unfortunately killed shortly after to his mother about saying, we don't understand. We were told that they were going to bring us flowers, and they're literally laying down in front of tanks. Which is reminiscent of Tiananmen Square. And it's so let's talk about some of the imagery that we've seen, and some of the some of the wonderful things we've seen, some of the terrible things we've seen. One of the things that sticks out for me, which I have to admit was very amusing, if you can say that in such a horrible situation, but it was the Ukrainian farmer in his tractor towing away. He just rolled up to a big piece of military machinery, hooked his tractor up, and just drove away with it. And you can see one of the soldiers running after it, and it's like good for them. Talk about the gumption. To just roll up with your tractor and just say, I'm going to take this. But my question is like, I'm hoping he's probably bringing it back to his own people. It's like, what are you going to do? You're just going to park it in the driveway? But, so there's been some remarkable examples of bravery.
There has been.
The UK president.
I've even seen some videos of Ukrainians starting up the tanks themselves and taking them off. And I mean, it's just really interesting. I did see one video of Ukrainian. I think he picked up some type of mortar or something, and he had a lit cigarette in his mouth and moved it. I mean,
yeah, the landmine, yes, off the bridge.
Yeah.
He picks a landmine up and just moves it into the woods.
Right.
Like, he wasn't even carrying it like away from his body. Not that would
No,
matter.
it was,
but I feel like it gave me
near
like
him.
well, maybe I get a split second to live.
Yeah.
Right.
And then you've seen also some just terrible imagery though.
Yeah, definitely.
Of where the Russians have been accused of committing war crimes.
Yes.
Bombing hospitals, schools,
The airport.
residential neighborhoods, the airports. I mean, you've seen some terrible atrocities.
Right.
And we only get a snippet, which is, they cut off internet to the country to try to prevent this stuff from getting out. Elon Musk has fired up the Starlink.
Yeah,
Yes.
Starlink.
Skylink, Skylink, Starlink.
Starlink.
Yeah, yep. To get them internet, which has been amazing. But this is really the first major conflict in a what, for lack of better terms, people would consider a developed nation, which has consistent internet and amenities between another power that's the same way. So we're seeing things that we didn't see out of Afghanistan or Iraq,
Right.
because they didn't have that sort of infrastructure for the most part throughout the entire country, like the Ukraine does.
Yeah.
And I think unfortunately it's going to get worse. But this is the first, I'd say, like, to me, the real time war.
Yeah.
Back in Vietnam, you had Walter Cronkite. People had to tune into the 6 o'clock news and get their information that way. Wait till the next day in the newspaper. Here we're watching it live on TikTok.
Yeah. Exactly.
So it's harder and sometimes easier to do misinformation, but it speaks to who controls what gets through. Facebook, in this instance, seems to be helping the Ukraine and U.S. interests by cutting off Russian misinformation that's being spread around. But so there's a lot of questions there. Well, why? Who are they? To make that decision? And it talked about, as he said, you're putting power in a few people's hands has a big influence. And I guess on this case, we just happen to be on the side that we prefer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think that's always kind of been the case, where we've had this kind of control of the narrative. And even in Vietnam, that was really prevalent. It was the government kind of wanted to have a say into how that was written out.
Yeah.
And there was actually a monumental Supreme Court case that happened during that period, and that was Tinker versus Des Moines and silent protest and in schools, because the government really didn't want people to be able to wear armbands that protested the war because they felt that it shed such a negative light on the efforts in Vietnam. So I think that it's kind of flipping the script in every way, what we're going through right now, and being able to look at everything and see everything from almost every aspect as well, because we have so much international news. You have people that are filming things on their phones and just posting it, and it's kind of crazy in that way. And when in history could you ever say, oh, the government's confiscating the military's cell phones? Like, you would never have experienced that in any period before now.
Exactly.
So it's really kind of crazy.
Yeah.
Well, and I think you're seeing a lot of nations react to this, not only because of Ukraine's sovereignty, but we are seeing things that we didn't see before in previous wars.
Yeah.
That people are getting this in real time, and they are seeing the horror and atrocity of war, where we were always shielded from it because it was never in our
Right.
backyard.
Right.
Granted, I think European countries have a much more vested interest because they're looking at this and saying, hey, we've seen this before. This doesn't go well for us. And it's scary, but also they're seeing it faster, quicker. They're not just hearing stories or rumors, and they're able to react quicker. And I think that's been part of the the international response. But there's also been surprisingly a lot of countries that haven't.
Yeah.
They're taking a neutral stance.
Yeah.
Which it's funny because even like the historically neutral countries are starting to put sanctions against Russia.
Right.
Sweden.
Yeah.
Sweden.
Switzerland.
They stay out of everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did Switzerland?
They did.
I think
They
they
imposed
came out
sanctions
and-
on Russia.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I thought it was just Sweden.
I'm pretty sure I
But-
heard that Switzerland did too. So it's interesting to see, that happen, and then Brazil and I think Mexico not really take a stance
Yeah.
or take a neutral stance.
Well, they
Right.
don't
Well-
really have a vested interest, I think, in a lot of that kind of thing. Only
Yeah.
because the biggest traders are the ones, or traitors, not as in like betrayal.
Benedict Arnold.
But those who trade the most with Russia are going to be the ones that actually make a large impact and a vested interest when it comes to especially economics and the sanctions that they're posing.
Yeah.
So Germany, even, it was kind of surprising that they were one of the first to act in terms of not only sanctions, but they've launched out 8,000 troops last week.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting to kind of look at that and see that the ones who are going to be the most impacted are the ones that are going to really start launching into this. And Germany, actually, their Eastern Bloc was completely controlled by Russia post World War II.
Right.
So they kind of have a historical vested interest in this as well, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, it's interesting when you see this, and it's easy to look back at, say, World War II, World War I, and when did people get involved, and why did they get involved, and what was, the interest. And you look at World War I with the sinking of the Lusitania, and we were funneling arms, on civilian ships. They sunk that, and then it turns out there was ammunition that we were secretly trying to bring over there. Well, we're not doing that secretly anymore. But that was enough to drag us into one world war, and now here you have multiple countries not even hiding the fact that, we're not going to put our troops on the ground, but we're going to give these people everything that they pretty much need or we think that we can do to make your lives as difficult as possible. And that is scary because I think I see someone who's, Eric, you said, deranged, unhinged. There's a lot of words that you could probably use for anyone who's just invading a sovereign country. And it's, what else is it going to take? He's going to look at these people as even more of adversaries than we did before. This has gone from a Cold War mentality that people say, we're back to a Cold War. Well, this is a hot war. And it wouldn't take much, I think, to drag other people into an even larger conflict. I know there's a lot of talk and looks at China. People, I think, looked at what our withdrawal from Afghanistan and how hasty it was. And I think a lot of what people consider to be the United States enemies looking at that, saying, maybe this is our opportunity to test them. And I'd be curious to see, unfortunately, what does China do with their interest in Taiwan, which I think is very similar to how they feel, how Putin feels towards Ukraine is how China feels towards Taiwan.
Right.
And that's very, very scary.
I think there's kind of like also something to be said for countries who are in kind of China and Russia's position as well, where they're not quite in the fully developed country stage. They're kind of halfway in between developing and developed, only because typically they're categorized that way because of their economic development and their wage gaps and their humanitarian issues, especially to those who kind of fall below the poverty line. But I think it's kind of fascinating that, post or pre-World War I, we were kind of in this exact same position. I think it's really interesting because pre-World War I, we were in kind of that same position of stuck between developing and developed. And it was those two world wars that launched us into being a quote-unquote fully developed country.
Right.
Whereas Russia and China are kind of still in that odd position. And what did we do to get there? We took advantage of a lot of countries who were already sovereign by their own accord and kind of stepped all over them.
Yeah.
And I think that maybe there's a view in Russia and China that this is what it's going to take to be a fully developed country, is you have to step on the sovereignty of others, assert your dominance, and then they'll be taken seriously. I feel like that's something that we may have even set the example of in terms of that is what it takes. Like, you can only threaten and continue to develop and grow your territory and kind of flex your muscles in that way to be considered a legitimate world power, because they aren't seen that way by a lot of countries in the world.
Yeah.
Well, and on that, we can try and transition a little here, talking about what do citizens do when they're not happy with what their leaders are doing, and how do they how do they react to that? So some historical context, it was 2014, the Ukraine, they threw out the government that was there that
Yeah.
rejected their, move to become more of a Western nation. And the president at the time was more friendly to Putin. And they went in and they threw him out, and they established someone that they wanted to represent them.
Yep.
And let's draw some parallels to that to what's happening now in North America. So you have the trucker convoy in Canada. Now we have 2 rolling through here in the U.S. I'll ask you guys: is this civil disobedience? Is it patriotism, or is it just a nuisance?
Well, how I see it is it's just, I mean, I wouldn't say it's like civil disobedience or anything like that. I think people are standing up for what they believe in, and at the end of the day, that is their choice, and that is what they want. They don't like what they're seeing with the vaccine mandates. They don't like what they're seeing with, in some states, continued mask mandates, continued COVID protocols still being followed, and they want to bring an end to it, and they're just tired of it, and this is their way for standing up for themselves and representing their base.
Right, so it's not really disobedience or a nuisance, it's just them protesting, and that's patriotic.
Well, I mean, the Canadian government feels very differently. So, Prime Minister Trudeau, really cracked down hard. He froze bank accounts of people who donated to help these folks. The truckers themselves lost their bank accounts. He tried to starve them out. He shut off gas to these truckers. I mean, really something that I never thought you would see in a Western nation. They antagonize, they try to crack down, and he basically imposed sanctions on his own people, and that's something that I think took a lot of people by surprise and are very disappointed in. But he has an obligation to uphold the law. These people shut down Ottawa for days, honking horns. They eventually leave it to the Canadians to be so polite when their judge says, well, you can do this, but you can't do this this often. You can only beep the horns this way and not after this hour. And then they obliged by it. But it goes to show you that they are, really, they're not intending to cause harm. They're not trying to hurt people. They're trying to make a point. And their government isn't listening to them. And then the reaction from the government was so severe. I thought it was a bit much, but I'd be curious to see is what would you do say as a student, if this was happening here. I mean, I guess suppose our students had no choice but to accept some of the mandates that were put on them if they wanted to go to school.
Right.
But we didn't freeze your bank accounts and take away your financial aid or things like that. So
right.
I don't know. What do you think? What should the outcome of the American trucker convoy, which is when one's coming through Texas, is the other one in Oklahoma ahead of them, or is that the same one?
No, it's a different one.
That's a
So
different
that one
one.
left out of California.
Yeah.
So I think the outcome should really just be the government listening, because we didn't see that in Canada. I'm pretty sure Trudeau called the truckers terrorists and arrested them, or towed the trucks away. They can't really do that here, and I can't imagine that they would try to call the truckers here terrorists. I think that they'd actually try to listen, and I'd hope they try to listen and maybe ease up on mask mandates or vaccine mandates, especially for the people that make the country run.
I think there's definitely an element in the United States that wouldn't necessarily allow for what's happening in Canada, just like Eric said. But I do think that our government has taken on a role that is no longer, we're here for you. It's more of, we know what's best for you, so we're going to do whatever we feel is necessary. And that is not the role of government. That's not why they're there. They're there to protect your rights against them, which is kind of the fun part of studying like the Constitution, is it's we the people, and it's a government of the people, for the people, and by the people, and they no longer take on those ideals, which I think is really kind of interesting. And it's interesting to see when that shift happened. They've become so much more parental in nature, where I know what's best for you, do as I say, not as I do. So I think that there's a really interesting element of that in what's going on, and people are now starting to realize that, hey, maybe the government doesn't know what's best for me. Maybe I know what's best for me and like my kid.
Well, we've come a long way since the 80s when you had rapping Ronnie Reagan. So the scariest words are, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help you." I just got my COVID-19 test kits from the government a few days ago. Well,
A little late,
but
Yeah.
maybe not. Maybe it'll be another wave. I hope there's not. It's still out there. Fortunately, here in Connecticut, the positivity rate is way down. The number of cases and hospitalizations are way down.
Yeah.
And with the warm weather coming, I think we're all very hopeful that we're past this, and maybe this is it.
Right.
Or maybe we die in a nuclear explosion. It doesn't matter anyways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I saw that was it the FDA with the nuclear guidelines? FEMA sent out the nuclear guidelines with the if in the event of a nuclear attack and you must seek shelter, please remain 6 feet apart and wear your masks. I am sorry. That is not going to be my biggest concern. I do wear my mask here. I follow the protocols. But if there's a nuclear accident, COVID is the last thing on my mind.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just me.
What if you run out of 6 foot difference in a shelter? Like, would they want you to say you can't come in? Like, that makes no sense.
Radioactive fallout, COVID.
Stay outside,
No.
Apparently equally as deadly.
Yeah.
No, their point is that just because there is one catastrophe, it doesn't mean other things aren't, of a harm to you.
Yeah.
Oh, they absolutely are.
It's just like people when there's a major hurricane, they lose power, but then they start their generator in their garage, and they die of carbon monoxide poisoning. But that's the sort of thing that just because there's a major disaster doesn't mean there's other things that aren't going to be even worse.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, look at the Revolutionary War. How many people died of syphilis?
Tons.
And,
A lot.
and smallpox.
Lots of people.
Especially smallpox. More of those people were killed than the actual war.
Right.
So there's always more to it. I think that was their point, but it's like, really, that's.
I would definitely be a
Wasn't
lot
gonna
more
be-
scared
not
of
gonna-
radiation
yeah,
poisoning.
Not gonna be the first thing I worry about. But
Yeah.
we've come a long way from the 50s where school children did nuclear air raids and they all hid under their desks, so they could be swept up neatly into little piles when it was all over.
No.
And, wooden desk, fireballs. I don't think that's gonna.
Yeah, maybe not.
People I know that grew up and lived through that and went to school during that time said it was a bit ridiculous. I actually spoke to my parents earlier today. So they were born in 1960. Past the Cuban Missile Crisis really when they were going to school. And my mother said, "Well, I remember doing drills where we got underneath the table, but we were never told it was for nuclear. We said it was for earthquakes." Now they were born and raised in Norwalk, Connecticut, not far from here.
Okay.
And I feel like earthquakes are not a big concern. So I think that's probably what they said to them.
Yeah.
Not here.
We don't do that now. Now we have other lockdown drills and other horrifying things that we prepare for. But it's a different world. But it goes to show you how quickly things and mentalities can change.
Yeah,
Definitely.
And from state to state, I think the trucker convoy was at Texas. They had a fighter jet actually flew over them in support. They actually had a police escort through part of Texas.
They did, yeah.
They did. Yeah.
Talk about differences. these are big fundamental issues that go far deeper than just supporting the truck convoy. This is like as he said, this is about what is the government's role and things that people really stand up for. And it's scary. We're more divisive in this day and age, and we can't sit down and have a discussion and discourse like we are here. Can't always take place. And that's that's scary, and that's what leads to really bad things, and hopefully that won't happen in our nation.
Right.
Yeah.
Oof.
So what else is happening in current events? We have the Major League Baseball lockout, which we're hoping is going to be ended real soon. I know none of you are sports fans, but that's kind of a big deal for a lot of people here.
Well, Kyrie Irving is finally going to be able to play in New York again because he's an unvaccinated player, so he hasn't been allowed to play home games inside in New York.
Yeah,
But
that's
now
what
they
they're.
have-
Yes, New York is lifting the vaccine and mask mandates. I believe
March
right?
7th, yep.
March 7th. Same with Boston, San Francisco. The most major cities are
Yep.
doing that. I'll just ask the two students that are here. How do you feel that the CDC has recommended indoor guidelines that you do not have to wear masks? It's optional for majority of places across the U.S. but the Connecticut State University system is continuing with the mask mandates here. How do you feel about that?
I think that a lot of people are annoyed with that, specifically because they just want to kind of put COVID behind them. And I mean, I would have to agree with that because it's just, I mean, you don't really have to wear a mask in many other places. Like, you go to a grocery store, a lot of people don't wear them. You go to the movies, you go out to eat even, but you come to school and you still have to wear one. As if people don't go places all the time without wearing them. It's just...
Well, a lot of people don't.
Right.
You know, some people wear it every time they go out in public.
Right. That's true.
Yeah, and so my brother's still in high school, and their mask mandate was lifted.
This is locally.
Yes.
In the Northwest Hills, right?
Yes.
Yep.
This is in Torrington. That was it was actually the Wolcott Tech School, so it was a state school. They lifted their mask mandate, and they're in more confined spaces than we are here. So I feel like it really should be and should have been a choice throughout the entire pandemic, but especially now that the CDC is giving guidance that, you know, we don't really need to wear it indoors.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the state university system is waiting a little too long to lift the mandate.
Well, what do
Yeah.
you think the harm is for college students here? Waiting a little bit longer just to see maybe nicer weather, maybe the numbers go a little bit lower.
Yeah.
What's the rush?
We're just sick of it. We've been in a pandemic for 2 years, and the numbers up here especially are very low. We don't have that many people on campus. Why still have it?
Mm-hmm. I think the pandemic has definitely taken a lot from a lot of people in many, many ways. And I think a lot of people are just to the point now where they do want to put it behind them and they do want to move forward because there's only so much that we can do before we have to move on with our lives and go back to some sense of normalcy, really.
And, you know, from a younger perspective, do you think the information as to why we went to mask mandates was justified? Do you feel like they work? Do they not work? There seems to be a lot of different information out there that no one has seemed to really clarify and point to
Right.
about that. So
I do feel like they work, yeah, but I think that once you get to a point where you're already at a smaller college and not a lot of people even have in-person classes and you're socially distanced and you're not coming in contact with very many people, I don't see much of a need to be wearing it at this point in time, especially when, like Eric said, other school districts have lifted their mask mandates.
Right. And I mean, the masks that most people have been wearing, the cloth masks, they really, I don't think have worked. The only ones that maybe do prevent anything would be the N95s, and I haven't seen very many people wearing those. We're just wearing them as a nuisance, and I don't think they were necessary to begin. Well, I shouldn't say that. I feel like the fear and the uncertainty that we had coming out of China when the pandemic started was definitely justified for wearing masks. But as we learn more information, especially with wearing just cloth masks and not even medical masks, it's just pointless.
all right, well, there you go. Well, I think that's all we have here for this episode of the Moosecast. I want to thank everyone for coming and joining us and speaking our piece. And we will be back again soon with another fun episode of the Moosecast. Who knows what it will be about? We'll find out. Stay tuned. Thank you.